Hello everybody, welcome back. Today I will be ranking all the books that I read in this past month from best to worst. A lot of these books, I'm sorry, I don't actually have the physical copies of many of the books here that I read this month because I've read the majority of them in the library and I had to return those to the library before I could actually film this video, so I won't actually have to show you the covers of many of these books. Sorry about that. And this was an amazing reading month. I read a lot of books and I loved all of them. None of them were terrible. It was just an amazing reading month. School is going to start soon, which is unfortunate, so I'm trying to read as much as I can before school starts and I won't have as much time for reading. But anyway, the greatest book I read this month is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. This is one of the greatest books I think I have ever read in my entire life. This is historical fiction taking place during the Revolutionary War, and it sort of goes into how the Revolutionary War, French Revolution or Revolutionary War that was in 1789? I don't know. Either the French Revolution or the Revolutionary War. I don't know which one. I'm not very well-tuned in this area of history, but this sort of goes into the details of how the revolution began, which is really interesting. And I learned a lot about real-world history from this book. But the greatest thing about this book is the characters. I've said it so many times, and I'll say it many, many times more. Charles Dickens is so good at writing characters. I don't know how he does it. All the characters in this book feel so real to me. It's amazing. And even the first paragraph of this book is one of the most famous opening sentences in all of literature, and rightly so. I think the first paragraph is just amazing. In fact, it's so good that even before I read this book, I had heard of this first sentence, of course, because it's a very famous opening line in literature, and so I actually named my own book The Worst of Times after it, which here it is. It was just recently published in the past 2 weeks. If you haven't read it already, I recommend that you do. And I actually named it after the opening line in A Tale of Two Cities because I loved it so much. But now, having read the actual book of A Tale of Two Cities, I love it even better. This is the first sentence. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. Just such an amazing opening line. Probably the greatest opening line to any book I think I've ever read. It's even better than In a Hole in the Ground There Lived a Hobbit. And Dickens' writing style is so good in this book. I don't know how he does it, but his writing style is so beautiful and it immediately puts you right in the moment. Everything is painted so vividly for you. You can imagine it so clearly in your head, and just the way the descriptions are written is so beautiful. The way the scenes play out is just amazing. I don't know how Dickens did it. And then the ending of this book. I want to talk about the ending, but I'm not going to because of spoilers. If you have not read this book, please read it. It is a book that I think everyone, absolutely everyone in the world, needs to read at least once. I almost want to reread it now because I feel like there might be some details in it that I missed the first read through. I definitely will be rereading this sometime. I don't know if it'll be soon, but I want to reread this at least several more times because I feel like there are so many details that I missed, and I just want to read through this entire book again and experience it all again. The moment I finished it, I wanted to reread it. That ending is probably the best ending to any book ever besides The Lord of the Rings. It is so good. If you don't cry at the end of this book, you either don't have a heart or you didn't read it right, I feel like. Oh, this is such a good book. I can't say anything else. It's amazing. 10.5 out of 10. Please read it. It is so good. One of the greatest books I've ever read. And then I have The Nature of Middle-earth by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is 10 out of 10 as well. I love all of Tolkien's books, of course. He's my favorite author. Charles Dickens is now probably my second or third favorite author because of A Tale of Two Cities. And this book was very fascinating. It's not a story. It is just a whole bunch of random information on the nature of Middle-earth, the flora and fauna of Middle-earth, how Middle-earth works. It goes into the biology of plants. It goes into elvish life cycles and just the way nature works in Middle-earth, which is really fascinating. And Tolkien was so creative. I don't know how he came up with all this stuff. The world building is amazing. He invented so many complete, fully developed languages for this world, which I think is just incredible. And all the details about the spirits of elves, men, dwarves. He goes into the morality of it all, what happens to all the races of Middle-earth after they die. Goes into the powers of the Valar and Maiar, which are like the angels of Middle-earth, and just so much interesting stuff. Really a fascinating book. It took me a while to read it because I was a bit burnt out from reading the History of Middle-earth series, but this was a very good read, 10 out of 10. The amount of detail Tolkien put into his world is just stupendous. And then the next book, I'm sorry I do not have the physical copy, but it is called Stuck in Space by Barry Wilmore. Now this is a non-fiction book. It is a memoir of an astronaut called Barry Wilmore, who in 2025, so just last year, he got stranded in space for about 10 months, which is a very long time to be in zero gravity out in space. Now, he only really talks about being stuck in space for like one chapter, and the rest of the book is like a memoir or sort of an autobiography of his entire life. And this book was amazing. It is another 10 out of 10. Like I said, I read a ton of great books this year, but this was so good. Reading about Wilmore's life in his own words, and he had a tough life. Everyone's life is tough at times, but his was especially tough at many times. And it was just so interesting reading about his own life in his own words. What I really love about this book is that Mr. Barry Wilmore is a Christian, and he talks about trusting the Lord in all circumstances and not being afraid because he knows he's in the Lord's hand and the world is in the Lord's hand, which I just appreciated so much. In all circumstances, always trust in the Lord that everything will work out for his glory. And this is an amazing book. I especially love that it was from a Christian perspective and that Mr. Wilmore wasn't afraid to share his faith. And it was such a good book. I highly recommend it. Stuck in Space is another 10 out of 10. And then we have another 10 out of 10. It is not a full-length novel. It is more of a novella. It's about like 50-ish pages. And it is not this entire thing, but this is just an anthology of a bunch of famous short stories and poems, novellas, few plays as well. But the novella that I read out of this was The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Leo Tolstoy. This is my first time reading Leo Tolstoy. I've been wanting to read War and Peace for a while, but I figured I should probably start with some of Tolstoy's shorter works. So I decided to start with The Death of Ivan Ilyich, since I've actually owned it for quite a while in this anthology here. And it was amazing. It makes me even more excited to read War and Peace and some of Tolstoy's other works. The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and spoiler alert, Ivan Ilyich dies at the end. I'm sure none of you were expecting that from the title. The title literally spoils the ending. This book was very interesting. So in the very first chapter, it is a bunch of people at Mr. Ilyich's funeral, and then after the first chapter, it goes through Ivan Ilyich's entire life, leading up to his death and how he died prematurely, which is really interesting. Each chapter sort of goes through these different moments in his life, and as it progresses, you get to know him more and more and get to know his life better. What really struck me with this book is how ordinary a man Ivan Ilyich is, with just his finances, his family, his well-being, everything. He's just like a completely ordinary person doing completely ordinary things, and his death is pretty ordinary as well. I'm not going to give any spoilers. He does die, of course, but I'm not going to spoil how he dies, but it's not really in any sort of remarkable or extraordinary way. And he is not a very brave person. He's a coward and he's selfish, but it's not very obvious that he is, which is interesting. He's just like a normal person. I almost find some parts of his psychology to be very relatable. And it really made me think, what would I do in these situations? This is such a good book, especially the ending. Leo Tolstoy is definitely an amazing writer. I can see that from this, and I'm excited to read War and Peace now. This is 10 out of 10. The Death of Ivan Ilyich. Highly recommend it. And then the next one, afraid Okay, there's a whole stack of papers here that I have written on the titles of the next books. I do not own copies of the next couple of books, but this one is Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. I have read a few of Agatha Christie's books so far, and I've loved all of them. Death on the Nile was no different. Such a good book, such an engaging storyline. It was really a page-turner, and the ending, it's a murder mystery, of course, taking place in Egypt, and the ending, how the murder mystery is solved, the explanation behind it, is something I just never would have thought of. This is another amazing book by Agatha Christie. I really, really am impressed by how she writes her plots and her characters. The characters were very deep characters. I learned a lot from them, and the plot was very engaging, and this is another 10 out of 10 book. The next one is The Maze Runner by James Dashner. Again, I don't have the physical copy because I had to return it to the library, unfortunately. Sorry about that. But The Maze Runner is a dystopian story. It's actually a series of 5 books, and man, it was such an amazing story. So the premise is that this boy named Thomas wakes up in the middle of this maze with a bunch of other boys he doesn't know, and he doesn't remember a single thing about himself. All that he knows is his name. He doesn't know why he's here. He has no memory of anything at all besides of how the world works and his own name, and that's all, which is such an interesting premise to a story. And it is a page-turner. Things were happening so fast. The chapters were very short too. It was a page-turner, and the ending was incredible. Another 10 out of 10 book. There's a lot of amazing books I read this month. And then, after The Maze Runner, is a short story collection called R is for Rocket by Ray Bradbury. I love Ray Bradbury's books. Fahrenheit 451 is amazing. I love The Martian Chronicles. Dandelion Wine was very good as well. And R is for Rocket is an interesting short story collection. So there is a short story. The very first short story in the collection is actually called R is for Rocket, which is what the entire collection is named after. And R is for Rocket has to be one of the most amazing short stories I've ever read. It almost made me cry. It was so good. Again, Bradbury's prose is so beautiful. And I loved a lot of the other stories as well. Frost and Fire was another amazing short story. Probably one of the best short stories I've ever read. And overall, this was a very good short story collection. Although, I will say, some of the short stories I didn't like as much, or some of them I feel like felt very random and didn't really have to do much with the theme of the collection, which the theme of the whole short story collection was space travel and rockets. And most of the stories kept true to that, but some of them had nothing to do with space or rockets or anything like that at all. Like The Sound of Summer Running, there was another one, The Foghorn. Like, a few of these stories just felt very disconnected from the rest of the stories in the book. But overall, still an amazing book, and I would give it 9 out of 10. The next one is found in this book, which I am borrowing from my friends. Now, this has the entire series of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. It has all 5 books, which is strange because it says The Hitchhiker's Trilogy, but it's not a trilogy. There's 5 books, so I'm not sure why it says trilogy. But next on my list is the second book in the Hitchhiker series called The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. I've been wanting to read the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series for a long while. It is a comedy and it's also science fiction, which is 2 blends of things that I like very much, and I loved The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. It was even better than the first book. Kind of a strange book, but a very hilarious book. I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the characters, although I feel like a few of the characters, such as Trillian and Marvin, could be written better, and I want to know more about them, but the author just didn't go out into very much depth with some of the characters. But still, a very enjoyable book, and I'm giving it 8 out of 10. The next one is actually the first book in the Hitchhiker series, which is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. An amazingly funny book. I loved it. Not as good as the second one, but still very good, and it's another 8 out of 10. My bookmark is in here. I just started reading the third book as well. The rest of these books I don't have physical copies. And let me see. The next one is The Will of the Many by James Islington. This was an interesting book. It's sort of science fiction and fantasy melded together. It was very interesting. The world building was great. I love the world building, and it was interesting. It was written kind of like if Brandon Sanderson had written The Hunger Games, which I think is a very interesting blend, and this was a great story. It had me hooked the entire way through. I could not stop reading it. However, I feel like it was a little bit slow-paced towards the middle, and there weren't a whole lot of things happening in the middle, but still, overall a pretty good book. I enjoyed it. I'm giving it 8 out of 10. The next one is another Agatha Christie book. It is Cards on the Table. Out of all the Agatha Christie books I've read so far, this is probably the one I like the least. It's still a pretty good book, but what I love so much about Agatha Christie is that the ending of her books always surprise me, and it's a plot twist that you never would have expected, that you never would have seen coming. But with this one, I could see it coming. There wasn't really much of a plot twist actually, and the explanation was very simple. Still a very well written book, very well set up. I still enjoyed it, but not the best Agatha Christie book I've read. I'm giving it 7.5 out of 10. And the last book on this list is The Path of Daggers by Robert Jordan, book 8 in the Wheel of Time. I'm getting very far into the Wheel of Time now. It is an enormous 14-book fantasy series. Each book is like 700, 800 pages. And I'm getting pretty deep into it at this point. I'm currently reading book 9. But book 8, The Path of Daggers, was an interesting book. The thing with the Wheel of Time is the first 5 books were really, really good. They were amazing. And then books 6 and 7 were not as good. 6 and 7. No pun intended. Books 6 and 7 were not as good. They were very slow-paced. It took forever for things to actually happen. And it was the same with The Path of Daggers. The beginning was interesting. There were some interesting things going on, but again, it took a very long time for things to actually happen. And then literally nothing happened in the middle portion of the book. Nothing besides the characters just sitting around and talking about I don't even know what, a bunch of random stuff that had nothing to do with the actual plot. But the ending was really amazing. The ending was so good. So the beginning of the book is interesting, the ending is amazing, but everything in between is a pile of dead fish. Just hundreds of pages go by, and nothing at all happens to advance the plot. But still, overall, a pretty enjoyable book, mostly because of the ending. I'm giving it 7 out of 10. But there you go. That is every book I read this past month, ranked from best to worst. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to buy my book if you haven't already. It was just published. I would really appreciate it if you buy it. I spent a lot of hard work on it, and I'm already working on another book which I plan to publish after this, which I will give you more details on later. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this video, and for now, farewell.